Matt, what are you doing?
Technical difficulties. Hey everyone, welcome back to the latest episode of Devs in the Sheds. You've got Paul and Aaron and myself from AWS. And what we do is we like to work from our workshops, our sheds, our cabins, get hands-on with AWS. For those that aren't familiar with the show, do a little bit of development, but we also like IT and stuff, which is kind of why we do this from our sheds, I'd say. But today, Paul is actually going to look to take us through some new features in App Runner, which are really exciting. So this is a big thing for some of my customers with App Runner, being able to have it communicate to things that are running within a VPC. So I think this is going to be a fairly cool demo today. But wanted to welcome everyone in. Let us know where you're joining from. Feel free to ask questions as we go. Hello, Undercover. I can see you've called out on the comments. We like to keep these sessions fairly interactive. It's going to be very hands-on with App Runner today. Sometimes we touch on AWS news. I think this week, what do you guys reckon? Shall we jump straight into it, or what do you both want to do? What's the audience want as well?
I didn't particularly prepare myself. Maybe once we once we do a bit of an intro, if you guys see something particular, maybe we can have a look at that. But yeah, like as Matt said, we try to do the session from our sheds. And if you've usually come along, you'll know that like I recently moved house. So my shed that you see, actually you can see it in the background. So if you look at the background, you can see that was my desk with my soldering iron, tape measure, and some other bits and pieces behind there. So I've moved house, and my house has a small log cabin, an old log cabin in the backyard. And I've been able to like run a big Ethernet cable out, and I've got Ethernet over power. So I don't know if anybody's familiar with Ethernet over power, but it's quite handy because you can connect your router into your power line, and then at a second point, either in the house or somewhere else on your property, you can have Ethernet again and come back out. So I've got that out, and seems to be running well today for the stream. So hopefully that will be a bit of fun. And if you look behind me, you can see. It's always super hard to do this, but you can see there the November Christmas tree that we did. Maybe later Matt will find that link to the Christmas tree that we did. We've also got the M5 stack. So if anybody's played with that M5 stack device, and it's a little embedded device, you can connect up to AWS and hook it to like a bunch of different services and publish messages, do it over MQTT. I think at some point we want to do that. And I know Matt, Aaron, and I were talking about another fun little piece that we wanted to power either that device or a Raspberry Pi by Fire at some point in time. And I think we're probably going to have to do that in the next 2 months or so. We'll organize some time to do that, and that should be quite a lot of fun to do. But yeah, as Matt said, this week I wanted to do a bit of an overview and a look at and hands-on, like we'll practically do it, App Runner and its VPC support. So for anybody that is unfamiliar with App Runner, it's a service that like really abstracts your CI/CD, your build processes, your hosting, and makes it like easy for you to go ahead and run your like Node.js or Python application. So those are the two programming languages that are supported natively if you point it directly to a repository. But it also can run like a full, anything that you're running in a container. So I mentioned last week that at Innovate, I built a Node.js application and a .NET application that both talk to the same DynamoDB, and that was great. I was able to deploy that and make changes to that within App Runner, and it's, it gives you CI/CD out of the box, and there's some mechanisms of configurability for App Runner, but not so much that you're likely to get lost or have to spend days and days building up like custom pipelines, and you can define it all in CloudFormation, but if you're like in a really early stage as well, you can go ahead and click it all through the console. Today we'll be clicking it all the way through the console as well. But the biggest...
Just going to ask, is there a clear difference between where you would use App Runner versus like Elastic Beanstalk?
Look, Elastic Beanstalk basically will run a lot of your work and will set up and configure into like an EC2 instance. So it can be a little more customizable to an EC2 instance. It provides you with like the .eb extensions, and you can do a lot of customizations to the instance that you're running behind the scenes. Whereas like App Runner would be something to say like, I've got a container and it's just going to like, work for me in a container, and I want a really easy way to do it. If it was like Node or Python, I would probably say it's easier. There's just less that you have to do there. And behind the scenes, like in some of the more technical documents that maybe Matt or Aaron can share sometime today, you'll see that like AppRunner is using like Fargate and the control plane of Fargate behind the scenes. So it's, even though you're deploying like code, it's running that all in a container, whereas Beanstalk is still mostly when you're pointing at code running like EC2 instances somewhere to do that. So I guess it's the evolution. But there's still plenty of customers using Elastic Beanstalk, but if you were going new now and going to like wanted some mechanism to set it up, you'd probably go with AppRunner. It's easier. And I guess that would also come down to like regional restrictions. So AppRunner is not available at the moment in as many regions as Elastic Beanstalk. It's still a relatively new service. So yeah, that's probably what I would say, sort of give as my answer for that at the moment. But so the biggest request and question and I guess like complaint about AppRunner was the lack of VPC support. So fine for working with like S3 or DynamoDB or anything that you can connect to over a TLS encrypted like endpoint, but not so good if you want to connect to a relational database or something like private to your VPC or another service within your VPC. If you want to do that, you would have to traverse over the internet, effectively traverse over the internet. Now, it's not like it's leaving like AWS and going out crazy all over the internet and coming back, but you still have to expose an endpoint or effectively expose that port to the internet on your relational database. Yes, you can go ahead and adjust all the security groups and lock that down to only allow AWS IP addresses, but it's not really that good practice. You want to keep your resources within a VPC that's private to you. So when AppRunner released this it's like a month ago or something like that, I thought, that's something like that we should take people through, and we could show that as an easy service to get up and running, you can now do it like following some really good practices. Whereas before it was a really cool service, but I'd probably sway away from advocating somebody to do that if you're connected to a relational database or something inside of VPC. I don't think that's probably the best practice to do it. So I'm really glad that the service team has listened to that and acted upon that like quite quickly. So I think that was a pretty quick feature release, especially everything that was going on around last year with reInvent and the way the world is at the moment. So I guess like what I'll do is I have shared my screen and I'll bring that up. And what I will do is show that this is the blog post that we'll follow today. So I have this blog post here, and I'll paste that in to the chat as well, so people can go ahead and have a read. Matt asked that question: has anybody had a look at AppRunner? So I'm wondering whether anybody has had a look at it at the moment, and whether they've thought about what that looks like, how it works, any feedback. So I'd be interested to hear that. But effectively, this is the post that we'll follow today. So the end result is we will create a relational database. We'll deploy that into a VPC. We'll connect to that database using like a bastion. From there, we'll create some tables. We'll create the users, and then we'll go ahead and populate a couple of values into that database. Then I've already got this code prepared in GitHub. So we'll have a GitHub repository. That GitHub repository will hook that into AppRunner, and then we'll build out an environment within AppRunner that enables, the deployment of this code and the environment that's going to be like spun up within AppRunner to use the code that we've deployed into GitHub and to connect to an RDS instance of MariaDB within the VPC of our environment. So we'll work through that today, and we'll see how that works. As you can see, like the code today is Python. It's relatively simple code. So if we sort of have a brief little look at this, we'll see that it makes a connection to the database. There is like one specific route. If we look down the bottom, so there's like the all books route, which is just a slash. So any other routes are just not going to work. But when you call the root of that application, it's going to like execute this function, all books function, which is going to make use the connection that we've created to MySQL, run a query, and then just loop over that and just output that into a table. So that's what we're sort of expecting to see today. But what we will see is how App Runner will take your files, such as like if you're building a Python application, if you're familiar with that, you'll know that when you have your dependencies, those dependencies exist within a requirements text file. We'll see that App Runner can go ahead and run those like build commands. So it can run, pip install from the requirements file, and we'll go ahead and pull those dependencies and package it up and deploy that into that environment. We can also customize the starting commands so that if your Python app needs to run, Python server.py or something like that, that it'll go ahead and do that, which means then you can, if there are a couple of different commands that you might need to change, you can go ahead and do that. And so, there's just a bit of a way to set up, a proper CI/CD environment. A proper CI/CD environment, like with actually very little work. And hopefully by, it's 12:11 p.m. here. Hopefully by 1 o'clock we should have this thing up and running if something doesn't go wrong. And I've done this. I've got a fallback that I can demo it if it doesn't work. But and I've made sure that Matt and Aaron are watching along closely while I'm not looking, in the audience too, if I make any mistakes as we work our way through here today. So
I was going to say, Paul, the Pyramid framework, web framework is going to be interesting. I've never taken a look at this one, but having a look further down at the code, just here actually, just in the SQL statements. So somebody is a very good has very good taste in original sci-fi books. There, Isaac Asimov.
That's exactly what I was going to call out.
Yeah.
Isaac, one of my two all-time favorite authors, Isaac Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke. So yes, Foundation for the win.
Okay, well, I didn't recognize them, so I mean, what does that say about me?
It just means that you need to be indoctrinated into our sci-fi. Yeah.
I mean, I like sci-fi. I think, I think I've said before, like my favorite series is Mistborn. So I forgot the author right now, but like I absolutely love that. So if anybody knows,
you don't know sci-fi.
Mistborn series. Okay.
You don't know sci-fi until you know Isaac Asimov or Arthur C. Clarke in books.
Okay.
Movies might be a different series.
In TV shows, it's Buck Rogers and it's Battlestar Galactica, the originals, and all that stuff. Yeah.
Well, maybe I'll have to check those out, see if they're on Audible. So, like when we look at what is happening here, we're going to prepare an RDS database. So maybe the very first thing I'll do is we'll go and we'll do that. Now, I'm operating within this account. I've logged in as an IAM user, and I'm going to use the AP Northeast 1 region to do this. Hopefully, my session hasn't timed out. That looks like it's coming up okay. So I guess a bit of that latency is around, because I'm running in Tokyo and I'm in Australia. So we've got these DB instances, and we can see that like I've built one before, so the App Runner VPC RDS. So that one exists. I'll leave that as our fallback. We'll go ahead and we'll create a whole brand new one, and we'll set that all up. We'll follow all the instructions all the way through, and we'll see how it goes. So if we go back here, I think that they were doing, so Amazon Aurora serverless, and we're using, so MariaDB, so it's MySQL that they're going to use there. So we'll use Amazon Aurora, we'll use MySQL compatible edition, we'll use serverless for the options that we're doing here. As we can see, there's a couple of different versions. We use 5.6 for this. So then we just don't have to worry about any of the driver configurations there. And we'll give that cluster an identifier. So we'll call it devs shared 1. And we'll set up the credentials. Now, to get through a better way to build credentials and connect to your database is to use I'll explain it a little bit later in the code, but to not use a static username and password for this. We'll try that. We'll see how we go, but we might just end up using the master username and database for this just to get it going. So I'll just use like a very very easy to password that it doesn't matter if I expose that to anybody. And because I'm probably going to use this as an environment variable, I've done that, and I'll pass an environment variable over to the instance. So for our capacity setting, we can see that we have that ability to even though it's serverless, that it will scale up and down in that environment. And let me just make sure that so I've done serverless there. So there's the minimum Aurora capacity units and the maximum size. So you can see that will go ahead and scale that. You can configure those changes around your auto scaling. So the amount of time that Aurora should look for a scaling point before it like works out, whether or not it should like fail that or timeout or force a different action or force a capacity change between those different sizings of the backend Aurora capacity. And for anybody that is unaware, like serverless Aurora allows you to like effectively hot scale. So normally when we've got like RDS or Postgres, SQL Server, MySQL, if you need to like horizontally scale that instance, then you need to like stop it, size it up, and then restart it back up again. And that's basically the way that you're going to get more performance out of that instance. So I guess there's the other piece to Aurora is like scaling that capacity to like 0. So if your application is sitting there completely silent and you don't mind some cold start, it'll go ahead and basically like scale the capacity to 0. I've used this feature and it's pretty good. If you're building something that you're not too concerned about, or you really, really know those traffic patterns, and you know that between 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. you basically get no traffic, that might be a way to like save some of that cost. So it'll completely scale back that cluster. It'll start up again when it detects it, but you'll have to make sure that your application then is looking to handle if there's a once you're trying to connect to database that's scaling up, that your application doesn't throw like 500 errors, so that it's got a graceful way of saying, hang on a second, my application's just starting off, just refresh your browser in a minute, or even just write something on the front end that just keeps retrying until it works.
Well, you'd probably want your app to have retry mechanism rather than have the user on the front end do something, right? I'm guessing it's only a few seconds, is it, from what you're seeing?
Yes, it's usually like a few seconds. I've seen it go like a bit over 30 seconds. So something in the front end that sort of just polls it for you and just like retries it again until it comes up would be a good way to go ahead and do that. Yeah. So now we're going to see. I'm going to create that into a VPC. I'm just going to use the default VPC that comes with that, but at least it's not in anything that's like specifically like public. We're going to like give access to only our VPC around this. So if I have a look at demonstrate that, so I'm just going to publish it into the public VPC. I'll publish it into the public VPC, but it doesn't really make any difference. But yes, so here's the VPC, and so here's that private CIDR range for that. This database instance, we're not going to give external access to that. We also need a security group that allows access to that database. I've configured one earlier, which I called it the App Runner VPC RDS security group, and we'll take it out of the default group there. So you have the web services data API, which enables you to like make HTTP calls to your relational database. Really like beneficial, but also like a little less traditional. So if you're used to building applications that you open a connection or you're using a pooling connection to your database, building this and changing this into a way where you prepare a statement, you make HTTP call returns that data, a little bit more, I guess, like a more modern way of going ahead and doing that and interacting with your relational database over HTTP. The scaling is like really good with that because you don't have to worry about like connection pooling. And so, yeah, it's a free feature to use. So we'll go ahead and we'll specify the initial database name. Now in here, it says what we should be using for that database. Now he does give it a specific name. I think it was like bookcase or something. Yeah, bookcase is the database. Yep. So we'll create that. And the cluster parameter group, I won't change anything there. The backup and the copy to snapshots, any of that, we won't worry about there. And I won't enable delete protection for that. So we'll go ahead and we'll create that database. That'll take like a minute or so to spin up. And like in the example, they create a bastion host. So an EC2 instance that is in that VPC that enables me to like connect to if I want to, and then make that connection directly to that database. I've created that EC2 instance, so we won't go ahead and recreate that. But we can see here that this is in the security group of the App Runner VPC. And that was allowing, like this is a couple of days ago, that was my home IP address at the time. We don't need to worry about that. I'm not going to SSH in from home at the moment. But what I am going to do is connect to this EC2 instance using Session Manager. So if you haven't used Session Manager or you're not using it, definitely check that out, because making configuring a Bastion host is something that's like really useful, but keeping keys and then managing like your PEM keys and SSHing in from the outside world always means that you're having to adjust those security groups unless you've got a VPN or direct connect. You're having a key somewhere on your machine. If that key gets lost or your machine gets taken, somebody can connect into your environment. They have access to that key. Who knows what else you've used with that key? So just one less thing to consider. Using Session Manager, I can connect it directly into that EC2 instance.
It's also just ease of use, right? Like, those are all good points, but I use it from laziness. It's like, I can't be bothered generating an SSH key. I'll just, yeah,
that's exactly right. And it means now, like for this specific session, I didn't want to, tab between like my terminal and the browser. So that's why I decided to do it.
I was just going to call out like the use of Systems Manager here to SSH into the Bastion host. This is something that, like working with big enterprise, a lot of the time they have done, RDP into the VPC onto their jump box or their Bastion host, and then accessing resources in their VPC. This actually secures that a lot more in terms of the Systems Manager actually creates the security group that there is actually no connection directly into the Bastion host. So it's the agent on the EC2 instance which is talking to Systems Manager, and then you're talking to Systems Manager to establish your SSH connection. So you're actually only able to tunnel into the EC2 via Systems Manager. You're not going directly RDP to the EC2. So it actually secures that VPC so that you're not actually having any external access. It's really just your connection direct to Systems Manager and then proxy through to the agent. Way more secure, and it's actually a much more common practice now in enterprise.
Yep, and that's exactly right. And it's not only just for EC2 instances. You can do the same thing back to an on-premise machine. So I can do the same thing back to my Raspberry Pi. So I run that SSM agent on a Raspberry Pi. From the AWS console, if I want to, I can SSH to that Raspberry Pi, which means that if I'm not at home and I don't need to have a VPN or anything, I can get that direct access that I need to do. But yeah, and if you haven't done it the first time, there's a quick setup that helps you specify all those permissions and setup. So it's reasonably easy to get that up and running. I just ran top here to demonstrate that you can see this running, and you can see my kids. Someone's making some noise out there, so sorry about that. But you can see that it's pretty responsive. So the browser works responsive enough to be able to go ahead and interact with this as a terminal, as a shell. So I have this machine. This machine now should be able to connect to that RDS instance because they're in the same VPC, and that VPC will be allowing access to that. So let's just go ahead and have a look and see whether I can connect to that endpoint. So if this is that endpoint, let's see if we can. So we'll just telnet to that. So I know now that my EC2 instance can, connect. There is connectivity to that new database, which is great. So I'll get out of that, and we'll go ahead and populate that database before we go ahead and set up App Runner. So I think that -p is not quite right. Actually, I think there's a small typo in there, in the blog post there. If I try that, I don't think it works. Yep, it's p. So I'll use that master password, and we can see now that I've connected to that MySQL database. So the RDS instance has spun itself up. I can connect to it with that Bastion host. I'm only using this to go ahead and populate the data for that. If you had you might do this once if you were just setting up the database, or you might automate some sort of script to go ahead and provision that environment, whatever you need to do. But all we're doing here is just going to set up the schema.
We did have something from the audience quickly, Paul. I've just put it up on the screen there. So integration with CloudWatch is also a plus over SSH with Session Manager there.
Yep.
Yeah, that's right. So you can with Session Manager, you can install the CloudWatch agent as well, and so then that way, once you have these agents running on your EC2 instances or on premise or on Raspberry Pi or anything like that, you can start pointing directly at like logs and log files, and those logs will, you know, push up into CloudWatch as long as you set up the appropriate permissions. So that's like something that's super handy as well when you're considering using some of these tools. So you know, I deal with a lot of customers, and I'll say like, where are your logs? And they'll say, oh, they're in CloudWatch. And I'll say, are they the application logs, or is that just the infrastructure logs? And a lot of the times I'll be like, oh, they're doing lot monitoring about how much CPU I'm using, or like whether the disk space is right, or whether there's some downtime or something. I'm like, well, you know, you're running a Java application. Where are your Tomcats logs going? Like, how do you try and troubleshoot something in your environment and see something, or measure some metrics over it, or, you know, look at it? And they're like, oh, well, SSH to the machine and like cat those logs. And it's like, oh, okay. And that's where it can, you know, come in real handy to, you know, push those logs directly into CloudWatch using the CloudWatch agent and SSM, and be able to connect in, so that, you know, the only real time that you should be connecting to your instance is if you need to, like, I mean, effectively like poke around and break glass into production and see what's going on. Looking at the logs and looking through those logs should be something that you should be able to do like without actually going to the machine. So that's a good call out there.
As an engineer, we spend a lot of time adding our, you know, try catches, error logging, all of this stuff that we do in code, that a lot of the time when it's installed onto the server, if you're not doing exactly what you've just said, Paul, then to get to that level of, you know, application diagnostics, you got people logging into the infrastructure, which there's no reason for it. You know, you can have all of these insights for your application in CloudWatch logs as well. And so, I mean, like, we teach best practices. You should be, you know, logging out your debug. You should be logging out your errors, all this sort of stuff. But then if we're not actually making use of it, then it's wasting our engineers' time, or you know, like, we're wasting our ops guys' time by having them to log into the infrastructure just to pull the app logs and send them somewhere else.
Yeah,
plus it could be too late at that point as well. It could be gone. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, also, if you're stashing your logs on the infra, then you're taking up space, and depending on how much you're logging, like, one of your infra logs is going to say you're running out of space, so you're actually going into your infra to clear out log space, which could have been happening, you know, in a serverless environment where you're not having to worry about capacity.
Yep, exactly. So when I created that RDS instance, I created that bookcase database. So we're going to skip that line there. This is the you know, there's a specific user that's created that book user, and that's what we're talking about using that AWS authentication plugin with RDS. I'll skip that for now. We'll see if we get enough time to come back. But this will enable, like, with the correct roles and the correct permissions assigned, for your application to be able to generate, like, you know, a token. We'll see that in the code. So a token that creates the authentication mechanism that connects to that RDS database, so that you can, you know, continually roll the username and password that you're connecting to RDS for. We'll touch on that maybe a little bit later once we look at the code. The way I've set up the code at the moment is just using that admin username and password. So I will just grant the permissions there just to follow along. And then we'll go ahead and we'll create these two tables. So we've got, like, actually that's missing a step here. So we want to, that last line. Must have not copied that. There's a quote wrong there. I'm sure everybody has done the quote copy paste error. You can see it there, just a tiny little bit wrong. What's our other favorite one? Some white space at the end just causes, you know, a bunch of conflict when you're copying and pasting.
Or weird characters, or like line breaks, unexpected, like because it's not proper markdown or whatever.
Yep. So so we've got, like, I could do describe database bookcase, but we now know we've got, like, a couple of tables that exist in here. So if I was to describe, because I'm using that database, what was it, authors?
Authors or books.
Authors or books, we can see that those tables exist now, and we'll just go ahead and we'll just, you know, seed some data into there.
Also, shout out to Foundation, the TV series. I
was just thinking that on the Apple,
one.
The Apple TV series is pretty good. Yep.
Cool. So now we're sort of like we're ready for this this piece of code to be connected into App Runner. So at this point, what I will do is go to App Runner, and we'll start creating our application. So at the moment, we've done nothing other than build some application that exists, somewhere on GitHub. But we'll go ahead and we'll create a new service. We'll do when we start looking at App Runner. This is what I was talking about earlier, so that you can deploy from your private ECR repository and do a container registry. So deploy a containerized application and label scaling on that. You can do it from ECR public as well. So you can specify something like, I don't know, let's just say, for instance, you wanted to deploy, Jenkins or something, right? You could find that on a public ECR repository, pick that image and go ahead and use it. More likely that you're going to be wanting to deploy, or maybe not even more likely, but probably more likely for us is I want to deploy something that I've published privately. It's my application that I'm going ahead and building. But today we're going to use a source code repository for that. App Runner has like hooks and integrations directly into GitHub. So GitHub is the only source code repository that's supported at the moment. But you can go ahead and you can add in your specific repositories and hook those in. If we look here, we can see that I've got my personal GitHub repository, but we've also got the dev shed because I've connected that up as well. So that's where we've had some of our demonstration applications there. Once you have done that, you can specify the permissions for the connector to GitHub to only allow access to App Runner to be able to see those specific repositories that you want to grant access to. So just because it has a connection into your GitHub repository, and that might be your enterprise-wide or your company-wide GitHub repository, you can restrict access to specific repositories. In this example, I've called it the App Runner VPC demo. And once inside that, it'll specify and will detect those specific branches. That's the main branch for me. Now I'll quickly go to GitHub and we'll have a look at that repository that you could be able to see. And that will be just the one that I did the other day. We'll see here. So 4 days ago, I went ahead and I built this out. Maybe Matt or Aaron can paste that in. And we'll see here that this server.py is the actual file. Now, I changed that a tiny little bit because I put in the database password rather than using that token. I had some issues when I was fiddling around that for a little while, but we can go ahead and we'll change something in that code. And I'll step through the code once we're ready to set that up there. One interesting piece about this example is that it is specifically using the an SSL connection to that relational database. And to make that connection, you need to have like a certificate bundle for that application. So when we go to creating that repository, so when I created this repository, I had a single file, server.py, that existed. If I was to run Python server.py, my application would run and it would start up. However, the application itself is looking for that database certificate bundle. I'll show this in a second, but I've downloaded that certificate bundle and I've added that into my repository. You might want to store that into S3 and pull it down every time you deploy your app, or some mechanism to do that. For this example, I've just put it into my repository. It's something that I'd have to manage in the future. But when I make that connection to that MySQL database, it is using that certificate bundle to make sure that we have all the intermediate certificates that enable my application to be able to connect to that RDS instance. So we can have a proper encrypted TLS connection to that database. So you can see in this repository here, that global bundle.pem file, I added that in there as well. And when we get to it, I added the requirements text file there as well. So if we look basically at the instructions here, it's saying, create the source of the application in server.py. I copied and pasted that code across, create a requirements.txt file, and these are the requirements that are required here. So Boto3, Pyramid, as Matt, you mentioned earlier, and the MySQL connector for Python. So if we go back here into a requirements file, we can see those are just the requirements that I put in there. The example application doesn't come with a repository you can link to, but this is the repository that you'd be seeing, or you'd be building that repository there. So we'll go back to App Runner and we'll say all right, for my application that I've built, I've pointed to my code repository. What are my deployment settings? Well, I really want that to be automatic. If you had a governed process where you wanted to make sure that was manual, or you didn't have such good processes and people were pushing to main branch and there wasn't restrictions, you might want to restrict when you want those things to go live. Fine. For us, I want that to be automatic. It'll only deploy when I've made that change into the main branch. For this example, I don't have any branches. I'll just make those changes directly into the main branch. That's fine. So when you are thinking about like what it means to like build and deploy your AWS runner application, there is, if we click on this info here, you can build up your configurations as a configuration file. Use that configuration file to sit inside your repository, and therefore you can version control and codify like the configurations for that build, which I think is like really useful. But for today, I won't go ahead and do that. I'm going to configure all of those settings here. So here it is here. So use a configuration file, create an apprunner.yaml file, place the configurations for that within that YAML file, and we'll go ahead and do that. Now that will be things like actually, like I didn't even know, like this must be a new release, but I didn't know that AppRunner was now supporting Java. So there you go. Like I just clicked on the runtime and I can see Credo 8.11 in there. So interesting. But yeah, Python tree is what I'm going to use today. We've got the build command. So the highlighted text here is pip. What is pip install -r requirements.txt. Just make sure that like I've done that exactly right. It's I'm sure plenty of people have done 100 typos when they're live streamed, and that didn't quite look right. So pip install requirements.txt, that'll just install those dependencies that we need to do, which means that every time a new instance or a scaling event occurs on this, it'll go ahead and run those commands. So we've got a really fresh working instance of this application here. And Python server.py, that's what we're doing. So that will start the application. That's running on port 8080. I'm pretty sure I didn't change that. So then we'll go ahead and click next. We'll call it. So now we're giving that service a specific name, and we can pick some of the scaling items that we want to do. So the size of the environment. So at the moment, there's one vCPU or two vCPU. And with one vCPU, you get 2, 3, or 4 gigs of RAM. I'll just do 2 vCPU, which you get 4 gigs of RAM at the moment. And then we can go ahead and add those environment variables there. So to do that really quickly, I will just copy and paste those environment variables as we create them. So database host. It'll be quicker if I do it this way. Port. The user. Database name that we're going to connect to, and the password. Now, the password, you'll be able to see that here, but I did it so cleanly. It doesn't really matter, and no one can connect to it anyway. But I have my RDS console. So this is my endpoint that I'm going to connect to. Because that's placed in that same VPC, it'll be able to connect, and we'll see that a little bit later when we configure that. So the host, that's the host. The port is 3306. The user will use the admin user. The database name was it bookcase? Not sure, that's what it was. I obviously can't. Yeah, bookcase was a database name. So with AppRunner, we can configure like auto scaling. This will determine whether or not, like at 100 concurrent requests, that'll start to scale that up. The minimum size is 1, the maximum size is 25. You can figure that in we can create our own custom scaling. So we can say, what do I want the minimum size to be? What do I want the maximum size to be? At how much concurrency do I want this scaling event to happen? So you've got some control around how your application goes ahead and scales up and down. We'll leave that at the default. We can configure health checks, so you can configure your TCP health checks here. So if you've built your environments, you know when your application is like, I don't know, run out of memory or crashed or something like that, like what that means for the application to go ahead and incur a scaling event, or to like take that that instance out of like that specific like target group in the load balancer. So if an instance becomes unhealthy, so if 5 times it becomes unhealthy with an interval of 10 seconds, then we can determine that yes, we should remove that from the pool. If the instance comes up after one request and it becomes healthy after 10 seconds, then we should include that back into the pool. So here's where it is. The timeout is how long should I wait before I get a response back from application before I make a determination whether it's healthy or unhealthy. So here's our security and our instance role here. You do need to create an instance role that enables like app runner to, like, there's a trust role. So we can go into this a little bit here really quickly, but it will tell you about the specific role that you need to make. So this is an IAM role that gives your application code the access to interact with other facilities within AWS if you need to do that. So a role that the your app runner instance is going to run at. I've created one earlier, so I'll use app runner RDS instance role. And here we go for the networking. So we can place our application within a custom VPC, and this is the newest feature that we've seen. So previously it was like public access. Your service can send outgoing messages only to the public. But when we've got custom VPC that enables us to create a connector, that connector, then you would choose a VPC, like if I didn't have one already. And for that connector, I'll just do it so we can have a look at it. We can pick the subnets that it will have access to, and we can also pick the security groups. So you can specify security groups for that VPC connector, and then based on the security groups, you can restrict access to what app runner will be able to connect to based on the security groups that you apply to this connector that we are going to create. So this is how you get all of that granular control to be able to limit, restrict, or grant access to app runner to be able to connect to items within your VPC and what services it can go ahead and connect to. And by services, that doesn't necessarily mean just AWS services. That means if you had some other, like a private load balancer running in your own like internal API, that would be that in that area as well.
Just on terminology, it's not VPC connector as well. It's just VPC endpoint. So it follows kind of the same logic you might be using for other things that are basically creating VPC endpoints as well.
Yep. Although it's called VPC connector here.
Yeah, I'm just like, it's probably like, that's probably a more familiar term for some people.
Oh, okay, yeah, sure.
Like, yeah. I'm just trying to make the terminology match.
Yeah, sure. So here you can see that like I've granted it to all of my subnets into that private VPC, and here's the two security groups that I've given access to. Like any AWS service, you can put your tags there. We'll go ahead and we'll click next. We'll review and create that so we can see like here's the repository I'm connecting to. It'll be the main branch. This is my GitHub connection. If I needed to change that to restrict or grant more access to different repositories that exist within my GitHub account, we're doing automatic deployment. So as soon as we see a change on that main branch, we should see that. It's a Python 3 application running on port 8080. The build command is pip install requirements and Python server.py to start that. We've got a couple of configurations around environment variables around what it is that we're going to connect to. So that's doesn't have to be embedded in code, though embedding the database password in an environment variable is not to be done. But we're probably running on short on time to go through that. Our auto scaling configurations, the health check, security, most importantly for today's episode, the networking. So just a bit of a summary there of what we're seeing. We'll go ahead and we'll create and deploy that. Now, because this like it should work. Like I've built out the code repository that should connect and go through that and make that connection. We should be able to see that this will go ahead and build that out. In the meantime, as we're sort of waiting for that, I can show some of the metrics that we would see after a little while as it starts pulling in some of the activity and whether people are interacting with that endpoint. But also we can look at the ability to create like custom domains, and I can show that as well. So you don't build an application and expect to have like some like default domain like this here. Now if anybody goes ahead and clicks this, it's not going to work. I'll paste that into the channel so people can have a look at that. But that's not really like an acceptable domain name for an application that people are going to use. You're going to want something like www.myapp.com. App Runner does provide the ability to configure a custom domain, so you can like hook up your domains within Route 53, use Route 53 to build all of the endpoints. App Runner will create the SSL certificates and apply the SSL certificates to you as well, which I think is really good. I don't know if anybody has been using App Runner at the moment, but I think one of the improvements that would be really nice to see, or one of request that I'd really like to see is to enable like HTTP to HTTPS redirection. So at the moment with AppRunner, it's a little frustrating. It won't accept the HTTP connection, but I'd love to see it accept the HTTP connection and just redirect it directly to HTTPS. So yeah, if you weren't using like a modern browser that automatically tries to correct that, and you went to a HTTP endpoint, you might be like, oh, the server, it's not working. Server's not working. So I'd love to see that as well come in.
Paul, do you know if the custom domain is backed by CloudFront?
I don't know. It's not, because like that uses, so that the way this is working is behind the scenes, and there's a full article about it, and we describe like the control plane of AppRunner. It's actually Fargate. So those are like load balancers, like application load balancers that are sitting there controlling all of that. So it's not controlled by CloudFront. It's controlled by the load balancers, similar to the way you would expect to deploy a containerized application within Fargate.
Awesome.
And I guess like if you were building your application to I don't know, have a whole bunch of assets or something, you'd have like assets.myapplication.com and you'd point that to CloudFront is the way I do it. Whereas the application itself, you'd probably go directly to the load balance, which is much more common practice. Though I do still see. Yep, go.
I was just going to say, I'm more thinking from like a multi-region type setup. So you could have AppRunner in 2 different regions running the app, and then you'd have a domain pointing to those 2 different domains. Obviously, if it's under CloudFront, it's going to make it more difficult to send from Route 53 to those 2 AppRunner domains. So that's awesome to know that, you could do a multi-region deployment.
Yep. And that's something that's like, my manager and I and some of my customers are starting to talk about, like, what it means to do like multi-region deployment, what it needs to do like, incredibly HA, right? And using like DNS to be able to determine whether something is down in a region or not down in one region or another. But also just basically to your point, Aaron, if I was building this application, I now have the ability to like, we've seen like I built like effectively got a CI/CD process. It builds it, it deploys it, it does blue-green deployments. If the deployment fails, it's going to roll it back. We can do custom domain names here. We've got some like activity and metrics. The logs will be going to CloudWatch. You layer, Route 53 on top of that. You deploy it in 2 regions, and now it says, oh, okay, well, if you're coming from Australia, we should use this region.
Yeah, geo-routing.
The US. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, perfect.
So you can see like how easy this stuff is to stitch together. And you're getting like the benefits of scaling here. Like this is quite a new service. So we're seeing like the features roll out over and over. I mean, I didn't even know that Java was in here until today. So I just hadn't noticed that had been released. So, great to see that. So while this is going ahead, like the first time it creates a service, obviously Fargate's doing its thing in the background, configuring that, and then the operation's in progress. I'll show the one that I had running the other couple of days ago. And we'll have a look at just what comes out of the back of that. So we do have here the event log. And so if we were to like look at what is happening, these are the logs that AppRunner is performing on top of this. So where is it up to in its process of like creating the environment, running the specific steps, performing the health check, mapping like the traffic over. So these are the AppRunner application logs, I guess what you would say. We can see here, like there's the deployment logs. So as you can see, I must have been fiddling around with this for a little while. I deployed it a couple of different times. There's a great service, but you can see, go ahead and can have a look at like one of these logs, and we can see what is actually happening at that specific point. And we can see here that this is the installation log. So it's, pip installing, and you can see that it's collecting and downloading all those artifacts from PyPy and configuring the dependencies that are needed for that application. I guess here when it was requesting Boto3, that's already included in this environment, so it's probably duplicated there, but required for local development if you're going to go ahead and use that. So I'm guessing the container that they use behind the scenes to deploy that has Boto3 installed already. And then we've got your application logs. So you can click on that here, and we'll do that, I guess, and we'll have a look at it, and we'll see what's happening. Because I haven't hit that for a little while, there's probably like no logs for a little while. But if we were to look at that in CloudWatch, we should be able to see that these logs are a proper log stream within CloudWatch. You can go into that, and we can have a look through and see our application. we can see here that like, there has been some interactions with this, and this is where I was like setting up that role for that book user. So you can see that, there's some information happening. Actually, I think what I was doing was I deleted all of the logs for this. So if we were to go back to, it's always going to sort of like refresh even on this, so it knows the status is up to date. That's the application that we expect to see on the new app. But maybe I'll just like, hit that a couple of times, and we'll see that those logs should come up within CloudWatch now. If we go back to here.
Near real time.
Yeah. It might have still be appending to this log here.
Yeah.
Yeah, like we said, near real time. Maybe if I delete, or maybe there's nothing logging out. Like there's actually no application log. So I'd need to put a print statement in or something like that. There's probably nothing in the code that's logging anything out. So my application isn't logging, which makes sense, right? There's no exception. So that's why we're not seeing any logs here. But yeah, so you can see that if we were to go back and we look at like the metrics, this is where we can see a bit of the predefined metrics that are collected. Now, I mean, these metrics are not great because maybe if I go like a week, we should be able to see some metrics. So here we can see that I was using it, maybe a scraper or something hit that the other day, or I was sharing that. But you can start seeing like, the request counts, HTTP response counts, like error counts, whether like there were some 500s or 400s. The request latency that's happening on the application, this must have been like cold start at the time. So the first connection 500, then it dropped all the way down to 80 milliseconds or whatever for the request there. But it also shows you your active instances. So I've used this before, and Matt and I, we like to use Locust to load test applications, and I'm pretty sure we used Locust when we were load testing the Devs in the Shed rock paper scissors application. This is where you'll see the amount of instances go up and down based on like your incoming concurrent requests. So you'll see that scale up and down. If you've set the minimum to something, or you've left it idle for a really long time, you'll see that your active instances will go all the way down to 0, and then you'll see it spike up and down where it needs to be. If you've got a lot of concurrency coming in, you'll see that's go all the way up high as well. And I guess the activity is just an activity log of the app runner service. So what is happening here? We've updated the service. So I've started deployment. So you've got that like auditability of what's going on in the environment. There's a couple of different pages here, so you probably see their create service there. So you can start to see what's coming in here. Now I've configured all of this clicking through the console, and look, I kind of went a little bit fast, and we didn't have to go too deep in the code. It's reasonably simple, but I mean, as I was talking and sort of, bumbling along, I probably did the whole thing in like 15 minutes, 10 minutes, something like that. You can codify all of this with CloudFormation or CDK, so you can go ahead and automate the whole process to do that if you need to. But if you're just getting started or building a proof of concept, or, you're still becoming familiar with CloudFormation and codifying your infrastructure and environments, going through the console is like a really quick and easy way to be able to have like, you've got CI/CD, you've got builds, you've got blue-green, you've got scaling. You didn't have to touch Fargate. You didn't have to do anything really complicated to specify like, the specific task definition. You didn't have to worry too much about like what's happening with the load balancers. If you were to do a custom domain, there's like one step to create a CNAME, and then it takes care of that for you. You're not having to create specific like metrics or logging. You've got something out of the box that's going to help you do that. You now have the ability to connect to VPC. Like, it's pretty good. Like, it's pretty good what you're getting out of the box these days for App Runner. And I'll close that tab, and then we can see that. So this application has now come up. So this is the first one, the DevShed demo. Now we'll see whether this works. DNS probably hasn't like propagated for me yet because I've hit it. What about you guys? Can you guys see it?
Let me check. We did have someone have an issue before with it, but it's working on my side.
Did you check that new one? I'll put it into private.
Yep.
That could be just like that. That's most likely.
Yeah,
like
that works for me as well. Yeah.
Yeah. It'll just be like a DNS caching issue, so that'll come good in a minute. I probably should never have like hit it here because like Firefox is probably caching it. Maybe if I maybe in Safari this will work.
Do a Cognito session.
Yeah, it works fine in Safari. What I'll do is I'll just go back and share. I'll stop sharing this screen.
Yep.
And I'll share my Safari screen. What's that, like that comment? It's always DNS, right? It's always DNS. You know, I've been caught out before why it's not working when it's the browser just caching that response there. But yeah, as we can see here, like, you know, I can see like here it is, like there's the list of books. Maybe if we're quick enough, we've got 5 minutes. If we go back to here and we look at this code, and I'll just to FA.
It looks like it's working for most people, so that's it's excellent to see as well.
Yeah, good. What I was going to do was just show. So at the very top of that app. Oh, you can't see my screen, can you? I was sharing the wrong screen.
We can see
we see
Safari.
Safari.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry about that. I forgot. So what I did was I went back to my GitHub repository.
Let me add it. There we go. Yep.
Yeah. So what I wanted to do was when we look at. So we had books. So that was books. That was the, you know, what we saw at the top. I'll just change something in the code. This will be fine to go ahead and do that. I'll commit directly into the main branch. No comments. I think that's what we like to do sometimes. You
need to be doing this Friday afternoon as well. That's the best time to do these types of changes.
Yeah, I usually like to make changes a Friday afternoon. I think that works really well. And so we see here now that, like, I've done nothing. I haven't pressed any buttons or anything like that. But, you know, the connection to GitHub has detected that there's been a change. We see my application has, like, kicked that off. There's an operation in progress. If I had have done something that, like, messed this up and it didn't work, it would fail the deployment and will roll it back. But in this instance, it'll go ahead and build that application and go ahead and deploy it. It'll probably take, you know, a minute or something like that as we go through. I'll sort of leave this up and we'll watch that, see whether that comes up, and we'll see whether that changes to, you know, books with that additional commentary at the end there. But yeah, this is what will happen if you're going ahead and you're building that application to, you know, you wanted to deploy, you have made that merge from like your develop branch into your main branch. You would see that it automatically kick off a build and go ahead and deploy that into production. So,
or even your development branch is just automatically building, right? So you can see like a view on how it's going to work in reality rather than just on your local machine.
Yeah, absolutely. And you could, you know, if you were running a dev environment for this, you would just configure 2 app runner services, one pointing to main, one pointing to develop. So develop would have like still constant up, you know, or staging, whatever you wanted to call it. That would still do automatic CI/CD for your pre-production environment, and, you know, your internal customers would be able to see that, or your beta environment would work, and you could do that. Maybe you've, I don't know, you can't really password protect or anything, but maybe the obscure domain is enough for you to be able to have that in the public eye, so you can see the preview build of your environment there, or maybe your application does something that detects what domain it's running on and, you know, blocks access to certain people or something like that. But yes, you can have that on any branch you want to deploy from. So yeah, you could definitely have a production deploy from main and develop deploy from develop. So yeah, if there are any questions, it'd be good to see if there's anything that I've missed or anything that Matt or Aaron have anything to fill in.
So I'm just wondering, like I'm looking through it myself. I can see, I don't think it does manage multi-environments. So as you said, you'd have to be running off main and running off dev to manage multi-environments, not like other apps where they handle stages. So you have one main branch which deploys into, say, dev, test, and then production.
Yep.
So it's more of a, maybe we should do a show later on repo patterns and how to build out like a mono repo or multi-branch repos and stuff.
Yep. It's really easy to do that stuff with Amplify, actually. Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah, Amplify does incredibly
that's
well.
Why,
right?
That's
I get paid every time I say Amplify.
Yeah.
Did you say Amplify?
I did.
Yeah, no, that's why I'm looking, because like using Amplify, absolutely, you set up your stages. So, but this is great. Even if you have to do the management for your environments in the repo, it still gives you that same amount of flexibility to then have multiple environments running based on your CI/CD process.
Yep. Well, we can see now that my browser's now got the old version. So I guess like we can go a minute over. I think it's worth like just waiting just to prove to everybody that it works there. And maybe we'll just have a quick look at like where the logs are at the moment as well. So it's the service creation completed. So that looks right. So we're probably getting really, really close now. So the deployment log is starting at the moment now. Maybe we'll just have a look at that log and we'll see what's coming through. So we should see that soon. So obviously this is building containers behind the scenes, but we haven't seen anything come through the application log. I know it will say operation in progress, but we'll probably see that change. Like, there we go. So as expected, like this still is finishing off. The status hasn't quite updated yet, but we can see that the application has now gone ahead and deployed that out. So pretty easy to go ahead and configure that up and have this environment running. Like I said, custom SSL certificate, put that on. You got your application in production, and even with all our rambling and question asking and experimentations today, we can see that in under an hour, just clicking through the console, we've configured an application that's like it's ready for production at the moment.
Excellent.
So yeah, I really hope that people enjoyed going through that. I think it was worth going through and seeing how that works and how it's configured. And I think it's a huge jump forward with AppRunner. And I think the uptake now of people actually running in production with AppRunner is going to dramatically increase outside of a proof of concept stage.
Absolutely. Definitely saves having to understand like Kubernetes or ECS and going and setting everything up yourself. Just set up your code, your container, and bang, everything done for you. So much easier.
No, it's really nice. I was going to say, I put our YouTube in. Feel free to have a look in the next day or two, or subscribe or whatever. I don't like advertising this type of stuff, but we use YouTube as a archive for all the videos because Twitch usually caches them for about 2 weeks and they disappear. But we do short streams on it as well, outside of our regular weekly time, right? So we're always here 12 p.m. AEDT Australian time on our Wednesdays. So, that's Tuesday for most people that are watching us across the globe. But we do impromptu videos. So this week, Aaron's done something really cool with micro frameworks. So we're just going to do a 20-minute video that we're going to stick up there. But in a couple of episodes' time, I think we've actually got a Raspberry Pi and a Tesla next episode.
Next week,
yeah, that's right. But the episode after that, we'll do a full-on thing on what Aaron's been doing with micro front ends. We're just excited to show something off. So if you'd like to see, a pattern that you can use for micro front ends, feel free to pop on the YouTube in the next day or two. It'll be a sneak peek into what we do full on Twitch in 2 weeks' time, where we have a full hour to cover it all. Thanks for watching, everyone. Really appreciate the comments. Really good to see, everyone in the audience. I know we've got some regulars. Royalty, I've seen you a few times. It's really cool to have you on. I hope everyone has fun continuing the build on AWS. We'll catch you next week, same time. Thanks. Bye.
Take care all. Bye.